Alright, so we have set up everything until now to have some content types and content parts of our own. What we will do now is that we will have a controller and see how querying and creating content items from code happens. So using content items and developing content parts and creating content types of our own is basically the bread and butter of Orchard development. You can't really get away without it. And what we'll see is basically what happens in the background when you click through the admin area and list content items, edit content items, or what happens when you do the same from the front end. So we have set up here what's needed as a bit of plumbing, because with the editor route values, we basically told Orchard that, hey, if you want to get to the editor form of this content item or of content items of this type, then go to this route. So this is basically just standard MVC. So we tell the routing engine, the area controller and action of the of where the code that we want to execute is, and any other route parameters come after that. In this case, the ID. So we just have to create this controller and this action. So I will just go into controllers and add the class with this name. And if you go back, we could also just copy the action. But first of all, this class should be a controller. So as usual, we should derive from controller. And then let's create an action without some further ado. Now, this personalized dashboard will need to have an ID as the parameter, because that's the route parameter that we have specified here in the handler. Now, this is basically just some very simple piece of glue, because when we want to display or edit a content item, we need to look it up first, of course, because we need to fetch the content items data from the database. And obviously we need some identifier for that, and in Orchard we have to use numerical IDs. So if you go to the back to the controller, we will also have an ID parameter, and we will use that as that lookup key later when interacting with content. So this will be just an integer, because such identifiers in Orchard are integers. We could also give it a default value, so it's not necessary to have this parameter. This is a common pattern. If we don't specify an ID here, then we could create a new content item or display the editor of a newly created content item. And if there is an ID, we will look up the content item with that ID, if it actually exists. So this is what we will do here as well. So let's get the ID. Let's get the content item. And how do we do that? Well, obviously we will need some kind of service for that. And actually there is a service in Orchard called Content Manager that we have seen behind the hood, and we have seen some of the features of it, but we haven't directly interacted with its content fetching methods yet. So I will go on and create a constructor, but I will use the ctor-inject snippet from the Orchard Dojo library that we have seen or that we have mentioned in one of the first few sessions. And the ctor-inject will build a constructor for us that also has an injectable dependency. So in this case, we will need something called Content Manager. Oops. and let's also call it content manager. Let's also add the corresponding namespace. This content manager, well, is, as the name surely tells, the most important service for interacting with content items stored in the Dojo database. So how we fetch a content item will be via this content manager as well. And this content manager has a variety of okay, this won't work. A variety of methods. And one of these methods, and several of these methods, are for building display and editor shapes for content items. Then also to create or modify content items, and also for deleting content items. And there is also one for fetching content items by ID. So just by feeding this ID to this get method, we have our first lower level content item interaction. So what will happen here? Simply we will fetch the content item with the given ID. But what if the ID is actually null? What we allow here with this default value? Well, there won't be an ID with a content item with the ID null. So we can surely know that if the ID is null, then the parameter was actually not supplied. So what we need to do then is to create a new content item. So this is the pattern I mentioned a few minutes ago. And here we can create a new content item object with a new method of the content manager. This method requires a parameter which should be the content type name. So in this case, we will use person list. So this line creates a new content item object. This doesn't persist a content item yet. It just creates an object that looks like a content item and which can be filled with data and then persisted later. So let's refactor this whole thing a bit. Let's also save the content item. Let's also save the new content item into this variable, but only if the ID is 0. So we'll actually need to factor this variable out. If we take a look at either the new or the get method, we see that it does return a content item object, so an object of type content item, because there is actually a class called content item here. So let's have this variable out here. And let's just put this into the else branch. So if the ID is 0, we will create a new content item object. Otherwise, we will fetch the content item object by ID. One thing we have to care about, what happens if the ID is incorrect? Or not particularly incorrect, but the content item was in the meantime removed or unpublished or whatever, it doesn't exist. Then what will happen is that this get operation will return just null. So we need to care about that as well. So what's the HTTP notion for somehow signaling that the thing you requested doesn't exist? Well, of course, it's the 404, the not found. So that's exactly what will return here. In the meantime, I created this personalist dashboard method, and since we are in a controller action just as void, I will change this to return an action result as an actual action in MVC. So if the content item is 0, it's null, then let's do something. And in this case, just return an HTTP not found. This will manifest as a 404 on the front end, and it will signal that the content item doesn't exist. Now, we will do some more stuff here, but for now, let's stop with the action here. Just one more thing. Let's return something. And we have seen how ad hoc shapes and friends work. Now, this is exactly what we'll use here as well. We have quickly seen ad hoc shapes or shapes in general in action, and we will create our ad hoc shape for this use case as well. What we will need is, or what we are looking to achieve, is a way to, well, display this content item that we have just fetched. Well, there are a lot of options to do that, but we will try to approach it from the most orchardy way. And that most orchardy way would be to create a shape template, so a CS.html file in the module, and display that shape template from this action. Well, kind of. So let's actually do that. So I will go to the modules folder, and in the views folder, I will add a CS.html file. Well, actually, we have some orchard templates here. So let's go with the empty shape template file. This comes from the Lombiq Orchard Visual Studio extension. And this will be, well, shapes or shape names are global identifiers. So all the shapes in Orchard that are currently loaded share the same namespace, so to say. So it's a good practice to prefix shape templates with some root namespace, like in this case Dojo course 2, for example. So let's call it Dojo course 2, and after that person list dashboard. And just as we have seen with the content part, shapes and shape templates, we can add the dot here, which will be then converted into an underscore in the shape's name. So let's call it person list dashboard. And there is nothing here yet. So before diving any deeper, let's display this shape template, return it from this section, and let's see it in action. So how can we display this shape from inside an action, and how can we kind of wrap it into an action result to be able to display to return it from an action? Well, we need another service for that, and there is actually a service bundle, called iOrchard Services. Now this iOrchard Services service is also an injectable service, and as you can see, it contains, well, other services in its properties. There is also this iContent Manager that we have used and directly injected a few minutes ago, but there is also this new property, which, as the comment also tells, is a shape factory. So this is quite a telltale that probably we need to use this. Actually, we could also inject a shape factory directly, well, an iShape factory, but for the sake of simplicity, and because we'll use some other services from this bundle as well, let's inject iOrchard Services. And I will refactor this Content Manager injection as well. Since the iContent Manager is included in iOrchard Services, we don't need it here. But again, I will use C2 inject, but this time with iOrchard Services, Orchard Services, let's call it like that, and let's add the namespaces. Now, we actually won't need this if we just have separate fields for each of the orchard services. So we could either leave this here, I mean this field, or we could just have separate fields for each of the services, like this for Content Manager. It's mostly a matter of taste, but we will leave it like this. So we just injected these orchard services. Let's actually use something from it. Now, we have seen that there is this new property, so we will actually use that now, accessing it in orchard services. Now, the orchard services.new is exactly the same as the display method available in templates. So it's kind of a magical dynamic object here that has dynamic methods. Let's say it like that. If you chain a shape template name or a shape name after the new, it will create a shape. And as we have seen during the theming session, in the end, Orchard's display engine will find the corresponding template too. So we have created our shape template here. We actually need to use the same name for the shape factory, and as mentioned, the dot will be turned into an underscore. So this is simply how we create a shape here. So this will be our person list dashboard shape, but not sharp. So far so good, but what do we need to do to actually return it from the action so it's eventually displayed in the browser? Now, as it happens, there's a class called shape result, so we could actually return a shape result. As the name already tells, but if we take a look at it with F12, we can also see that it's a view result. It derives from view result, so it won't be a surprise that it's actually, well, we need to go a bit further, but it's actually an action result. So we will be able to return it from an action. Oops. So let's return it. It needs two parameters. The first one should be the controller itself. So this will be just a this. And the second one needs to be a shape. That's what we created 2 lines above. So that needs to be the person list dashboard shape. So, so far so good. Let's start the application again, and let's see how this thing actually works. So remember that we are in the Dojo course.module, and our controller's name is contents admin, and the action is person list dashboard. So we need to create a route that matches that. So yeah, the first will be the module name, the first segment, the second will be the controller name, and the third segment will be the action name. Sorry, it should be contents admin. So it actually works. We get nothing as the output, which is quite meta because it's actually not nothing. But anyway, it signals us that this thing works. So that's good. But we haven't done anything with these content items yet. Now, let's do 2 things. Well, first of all, I will rename this contents admin to contents admin controller. This was simply a mistake that I made. it won't make a difference basically anywhere, it's just a convention. And secondly, I named it Contents Admin Controller. Now all of these controllers we have seen before are just front-end controllers. That means that ordinary users will be able to access them from the front end of the website. But you can also create admin controllers. Now, admin controllers, first and foremost, are different in a way that they can be accessed as part of the dashboard, as part of the admin area. And secondly, there is by default also some basic level of access control. So normal users who have just registered or aren't even authenticated won't be able to access these controllers. And how do we make a controller into an, or how do we convert a controller into an admin controller? Well, there will be another attribute, apart from the themed attribute that we have seen, called admin. Quite wonderful. So let's do the same. Everything else will remain the same, but just let's restart or reload the controller and let's see what happens. So now dynamic compilation is kicking in the background, and the module is loaded, but it doesn't work. Let's try again. Okay, now iOS Express is indeed running. And this time it works. Exactly the same route, though something was fishy in the background. Probably dynamic compilation has broken in the past few minutes. But anyway, what we can see here is that something changed. Well, actually two main things changed. One thing is that we can now see this nothing in the context of the actual dashboard. So that's quite cool, because now we have a page on the actual dashboard, not on the front end. And secondly, well, we are logged in as the admin here, but let's take a quick look and open an incognito window, which apparently isn't happening with the same as Ctrl-Shift. Yeah, so here's our incognito window. Let's try to open the same page here, and we get an access denied error. So, as mentioned, with this admin attribute, we also get some very basic level of access control as well. So just anybody won't be able to open this action if you have, or any action in the controller if you have the admin attribute on it. But we still didn't do anything with our content items. So let's go back. We have fetched this content item here, but we want to display it on the front end. So let's pass it to the shape. However, if you would pass the content item object itself to the shape, then in the shape template we could access the properties of the content item, but it wouldn't be a display shape of the content item yet. Now, we have multiple options here as well, but we have the content manager already here, so let's utilize that. The content manager also has some build something shape methods, and what's also there is this build display shape and this build display method. Now, the build display, as also explained in its comment, will create the display shape of the content item that we feed to it. So this is probably we will need, because if we create the display shape of the content item, then Orchard will automatically build the whole structure on the front end for it. Orchard will automatically build the pieces built into Orchard will automatically output all the data. So for example, the title and the body, text, whatever in the content item. So let's pass the content item to this build display method. And here's the display type that we have seen in action multiple times. As again, we could, for example, use summary or detail. Now let's use detail in this case, which will let Orchard build the shape, the display shape in the detail display type for the content item. That means it will be displayed in basically the same way as it would be if you open that content item from the front end. So this will be our display shape, which we will pass to this person list dashboard. Now, if you are creating ad hoc shapes, you can also pass arguments to them, which can be named arguments, and just create it dynamically. So if I add a person list shape attribute here, it will work. So this line, or let's break here, this line will create a dynamic property that will be accessible from inside the shape template called person list dashboard shape, and the display shape will be in there. So we'll be able to display the content item. So let's go back to our shape template and actually display this content item display shape. So let's remove nothing. And what we'll need here is the display method, or well, the display object that's a property on the template. Now, one of the usages of display is to use it as a method. And if you pass a shape to this display method, it will, well, render the shape. So the corresponding HTML will be built, and we'll actually see something in the browser. So, we will need to access that person list dashboard shape from the model, because there will be an automatically created property available for us. So now if I hit Ctrl+Shift+S to save everything and do a reload, after dynamic compilation has compiled our code changes, we should be able to see, well, something. But it won't be too satisfying yet. Okay, so what are we seeing here? Remember that we added a parameter to our controller action, and by default it has the value 0, in which case we will just create a new content item. So actually what we see here is a brand new vanilla content item without any data that we added here. So what happens if we also supply a parameter here? Now let's go back to the content menu and let's see what the ID of the person list content items that we have created are. So let's person list is not listable apparently, so I will make it listable, so we can actually see the person list object, person list content items here. So yeah, now it's listable. And let's go back to the content item list. And if you filter for person list, well, there's just one. Now if you open this content item, at the end you see this 37. This is actually the content item ID, the numerical ID that every content item in Orchard has. So if we supply the ID 37 to this section, then probably we will actually see this test pairs on this content item, and that's what also happens. So this is again an MVC convention, but if you pass values for parameters just after the slash as a next section in the route, it will automatically forward it to the action parameters in order. But you could also say, instead of just saying /37, that I want the ID to be 37. And it should still work, but it doesn't really. Well, for some reason the name parameters aren't working now, but the positional ones are. So that's half of a success, I would presume. So the big takeaway here is that you may need to, well, you surely will need to interact with content items from code eventually. And if you want to do that, the content manager is the service that you need to access. It has a lot of methods for editing, removing, well, modifying, and of course also fetching, retrieving content items. We have seen some of those just now.